If walls could talk, oh, but they can. Awesome. Well, welcome to All Things Stress. Today, I am excited to share Stacy Scott. She is a Feng Shui practitioner and inner child healer. And today, she's going to talk all about how the home speaks to us about our trauma and how we can also use the home to help heal our trauma. So, Stacy, before we get into feng shui and what all of that is, why don't we go ahead and start with your story and how you became a feng
Yeah.
shui
Hey,
practitioner?
by the way, thanks so much for having me. I'm so thrilled to be here. So, feng shui came to me in the most roundabout, I was hitting rock bottom kind of way. Before I started doing feng shui, I actually have a doctorate in occupational therapy, and that's in healthcare. And after doing that for over a decade, I was incredibly burnt out, like stick a fork in me burnt out. Starting to really notice my mental health was really, really poor, and was just getting worse. And before I decided to actually stop working, what I was doing as an OT was very much kind of along the same vein as feng shui, but I was doing something called home modification. And that's where I was going into seniors' homes and I was helping them figure out how to age in place. I was going in with my grab bars and my stair glides. But I was just personally hitting rock bottom. So I decided to quit. I had no plan. Honestly, I was more worried about my mental health than anything, so I just decided to quit without a plan. But then I'd say within just a few weeks of giving myself just space and time to breathe and relax, I very clearly heard in my head, like a total spiritual girly, heard in my head, you need to look at feng shui. And this voice wasn't my voice. And before I know it, I'm down a rabbit hole on Google and I'm realizing that feng shui became the answer to all of my questions that I had been asking myself since I was a child about the
Hmm.
meaning of home. Because I grew up in a tougher environment, not just it was like emotionally abusive. The home was very, very cluttered and stale energy. And feng shui became the answer to the questions I'd been asking myself my entire life. And so before I knew it, I had gone through a 6 month certification and I connected it to healing of trauma, especially for women. And that's where I am.
That's so awesome. I think in the diving that I've been doing in the last year and a half, which has brought me to the point where I'm at now, I have realized that that childhood trauma is so much more common than people realize, and that there are people who have trauma and don't even know that they have trauma. And for me, it's been interesting just going through your content on Instagram and having that self reflection because I know that I had trauma growing up. And it's so fascinating to look at what you've said about how the home reflects those traumas. And I'm like, oh, okay. This starts to make more sense now. And so, yeah, it's just fascinating. So I'm so excited. So, let's get into what is feng shui because I've heard a little bit about it, and I know it has to do with your home and like how you set things up and all that, but
Well, I'm
tell
going to
us a
give you
little bit
two
more about that.
definitions. I'll start with kind of the more generic definition, but then I'll go in and really give you how I see it and how I apply it. But from a more bird's eye view, feng
Awesome.
shui is a originally out of it's about 5,000 years old. It's out of China, Tibet, and India. So it's that whole kind of Western Asia steppe, even parts of Mongolia, which of course we've lost that history, but we know that it's out of parts of Mongolia as well. And originally it was all about designing not just your home, but your communities to be in alignment with the energy of the land, how to create your gardens so they were more bountiful, where to set up your home along the right part of the river bend so you caught the right fish. And it was really about being observant and
Hmm.
aware of the world around you through its different seasons. So you were always really in alignment with the abundance and the bounty of the land itself. Of course, fast forward 5,000 years, now we primarily apply it to our homes. But the same energies are prevalent in your home as well. So feng shui is really a mixture of an art and a science that looks at all of these different types of energy flow and helps you not only design, but live within a home that's very much in alignment for your highest good. And now, if I was to dive in a little bit deeper, when I first started doing feng shui, I tell this story all the time. I felt like the biggest freaking fraud because I had been taught all these different cures and all these great things to do, and they're working for everybody else. And I'm noticing that they're not working for me.
Mm,
And I'm a trauma survivor, so immediately, at least at that time, the voice in my head was saying, "Well, there's something wrong with you. You're, it's going to work for everybody else. It's not going to work for you."
yeah.
And I remember my very first feng shui cure I ever did. I had part of it was about ringing a wind chime, and my body went into a full blown panic attack because the abundance that I was calling in, what I was asking the universe for, my body was not yet ready to receive. And my body shut down and went into a trauma response. And it got me thinking about how all the other people in the world that have tried feng shui and it didn't work for them when it really wasn't their fault, that we don't speak
Mm.
about the abundance and this wisdom in a trauma, using a trauma lens or perspective. So I've been filling that gap. And that's why you were saying before, Crystal, like it's so amazing to you because your subconscious mind really does come out in your space. The things that you choose, the colors you choose, how you set it up, even the home you choose, the geographic area you choose, all of that is your subconscious coming out into space. And I just realized for so many trauma survivors, especially women, our homes are reinforcing this pattern and this energy in our bodies that we're not good enough, we're not worthy. And I just decided that was bullshit and that could be changed and that could be healed. So that's really how I apply. That's really the whole ethos of what I do.
That's awesome. I've definitely never heard of using feng shui from a trauma perspective, but I think that also just opens up the whole lens of for a lot of people who've had trauma and we're trying to get into the healing spaces and whether or not you know you have trauma, because again, sometimes trauma is just from having parents that hold really high expectations and you feel like you're always failing. Like that can be a source of trauma. And then there's also like you talk about narcissistic trauma or abusive trauma, whether it be emotional, sexual, physical, whatever. Like there's so trauma is so diverse and so individual, and how we respond to that is so individual. And I just think it's fascinating how that comes out in our spaces. And like you've been doing this color series on Instagram, and it's been interesting because then you'll talk about a color and you're like, oh, I see a lot of blues, and I'm like, I have a lot of blue in my house. Or like, people might be avoiding yellow, and I'm like, I definitely don't have yellow in my house. There's just different things. Like I'm like, oh yeah, I don't really have that color. And oh, like the when you talk about red and being seen and like being open to being seen, red is my mother's favorite color. And I know that's kind of like a generational thing, but I also I avoid red, and I know I avoid it because it's so out there and in your face and vibrant and like here I am. And as much as I am very much a Leo and a performer, if I'm not in the moment of being a performer on someone, then I may not actually want to be seen. And so it may be like when I'm out in public, I'd rather wear black so that I don't get people like noticing me or whatever, just it was so fascinating. But anyway, so obviously I've started kind of seeing how my own history is playing out through just even the colors in my home. Um, so colors or whatever else, like what are some ways that going back to not everybody even realizes that they have trauma, but what are some ways that our home can be telling us that we have some type of trauma that is needing to be healed that we can then
Yes,
further
that's
look
such a great
into?
question. So, a lot of the examples that I'll use are just the ones that I see most often. So you already touched on color. So sometimes having an overabundance of one specific color versus not having another color can tell you something and what those colors mean, at least in a feng shui context. Of course, there's going to be lots of different meanings of color, but in a feng shui context, each color means something different. And it's each color kind of, I like to say, it vibrates at a specific level of abundance. And so you don't
Hmm.
dislike or hate color. You had some sort of experience or instance around that specific color that taught you not to like it. So your conscious mind is saying, oh, no, I hate, for me, it was purple. I hate purple. But really, in feng shui, purple is easy abundance. It's a feeling of self worth. And I did not have that growing up as a kid. And so, even as an adult, I had absolutely no purple in my life at all. In my home, in my wardrobe, nothing. And it's actually taken my body time to acclimate to purple in my home. I just got some purple artwork up on the walls. And so that's one of like such like a clear-cut example of, you know, what you might have and what you might notice in terms of increasing your awareness of how your subconscious is sharing your story. The other thing I notice for folks is if you are avoiding doing common household tasks. Now, granted, nobody likes doing these things, but it's like if your body goes into a trauma response, one of the four trauma responses, fight, flight, freeze, fawn, or flee. Um, and if you notice that you're doing that in response to doing the dishes, taking out the trash, I want you just to be very honest with yourself. And is that something that was used against you as punishment as a kid? I so often hear, I can't do the dishes because my mother yelled at me one time that I was doing them wrong, or I was forced to do the dishes every single night, or I couldn't play, or if I didn't do well on a test, I was forced to do the dishes. Insert doing the dishes for any other common household task. But that's really what you want to start to look
Mm.
at, how your interaction with space can be triggering to your nervous system as well. Because to me, this is the last kind of frontier when we talk about healing trauma. We talk about it so much in our bodies now, the somatics of it. But your home is really just as important. Of course, it gets overlooked because it's outside of yourself. But in feng shui, we know that you are in an open and reciprocal relationship to your space. So you are impacting your space and your space is impacting you. It's kind of like the Tin Man who does, crosses his arms and goes, both ways kind of vibe. And so it's actually a really powerful relationship that you have, but so many of us see our homes as adversaries instead of allies. We say, oh, I just have a million things to do, and then we'll just go sit on the couch because we'd rather doom scroll. I do this all the time, by the way. There's no shame. I totally have a Netflix support show that I'll watch again and
Same.
again and again. But I know that I'm doing it. And the point is not to force or bully yourself out of the pattern. It's just to stop and have more awareness once you're aware of it. And then you will start naturally, if you choose, to move through it. And that's what I do with my folks.
Yeah. Um, One of the things that I've heard you say in regard, so speaking of taking care of the home, is you talked a little bit about, um, I don't remember how it's phrased, but it's like a mess. What
Mm,
is it? A messy home is evident of a messy mind, or something like that. And I've never really heard that specifically before, but I have heard of, like, if you clean your space, it'll help you clear your head. And so I'm kind of curious about that
yeah.
perspective on
So
that
the
as
reason
well. Like,
I think you're referring to what I just posted on Instagram like 2 days ago. Um, that particular phrase for me, I feel like a lot of women use against themselves because it's said in a bit of a shamey way. And so when we talk about the greater role of the home, but also a woman's place in the home, it's very much still like these 1950 vibes, right? But I find that a lot of the shame around the amount of emotional labor and even physical labor that women still do in the home, whether or not they have children, is still very much a prevalent thing. And so we have a lot of this generational bullcrap that has been still in our society that, oh, your home can never look a certain way because what will the neighbor say? And so many of us design our homes really for the gaze of others without even noticing it. And I promise I'll get back to that phrase in
Hmm.
just a second. But a very clear cut example of this is next time you're in Target and you pick something up, probably the question that's going to come to your mind is, well, will this look good? It's never, will this make me happy? Does this object make me feel safe and secure emotionally, physically, financially? It's always more about, well, will this look good? And when we say good, we're really using that term as a way to cover up this idea that we're building home for others. So we can project our wealth and our abundance through our home. And I'm not saying everybody does that, but that's very much something that gets put out into the world through life's influencer culture that women find like they don't even notice it, but it's very shaming. And so when a phrase like this comes to my mind, that
Yeah.
kind of you're a messy home is evidence of a messy mind, that very much came out of this minimalistic movement, which I could talk about for days why I'm over it. And your home really needs to reflect you.
I've never been
It, it,
able to
it
do
just
that.
it got co-opted very early by the luxury lifestyle movement. What started off as something that was a pursuit of simplicity and inner truth really became the new stand-in for luxury and wealth, because then you got to project out into the world that you just have nothing, and it became the new cool girl thing to do. Because then also you can on the back end go and rebuy everything should you need it, and it became this very classist way of portraying your wealth. So phrases like that, your home, a messy home is evidence of a messy mind, is just keeping people stuck because it's very shamey. And now, of course, we can say this in a more positive way that
Mm,
a
yeah.
clean home reflects a clean mind. It's slightly more positive, but I don't even like this connection between home and mind at all in that way. Of course, what I'm saying is that your subconscious is coming out in your space. But the pathway to healing people through the home is cannot be paved with shame. And that was my whole problem with the minimalistic movement, that ultimately it was about simplicity. But simplicity isn't simple if the pathway there is paved in shame. And so I feel like phrases like that are just offshoots of this kind of nugget of
Hmm.
telling women that they're failing in some way if their home doesn't look perfect.
Yeah, well, it's interesting that like you say, we still have this idea that women are taking care of the home. And, but the thing is that now when you work 40 hours a week and you still have to make all your meals and clean everything up, it's like you get home from at the end of the day from work and you may be
Totally.
completely exhausted. I know I am. I'm exhausted, like, especially being in patient care and I'm constantly thinking all day long about, okay, this person is here for this kind of pain. I think it's these issues and I need them to do these exercises. Are they ready or not to progress? What, like, all, and then I get to home at the end of the day and my brain is done. It's like at that point, and then I go spend an hour, half hour, an hour in the kitchen making dinner. And at the end of all of that,
Yeah.
I do not want to do dishes at that point. I'm like, I am tired. I'm going to sit down and like watch TV for an hour before I go to bed. Like, I don't. So just the idea that we still have to keep up the the I don't necessarily want to say lifestyle, but like the home expectations of all the cooking and the cleaning and all of these things that we kept up when we
Hmm.
didn't have full-time jobs. And then now, like, if you have, like, I don't have kids yet, but if
Hmm.
you have kids on top of it, like, that's a whole nother layer of stuff to add to it. And yet we still have these expectations that, oh, I need, if I have guests come over, I need to do a deep clean of my house. And sometimes if I know people well enough, I'll be like, hey, my house is a mess and I'm sorry. But like, I know
Yeah.
you well enough. So like, we're good. And usually they're like, whatever, my house is a mess too. So it's, sometimes I'm like, okay, well, let's clean up the area that we're going to be sitting in dinner, but I don't have to have everything else cleaned up. Although my husband wants everything else cleaned up. And I'm like, you know what? If the living room's a mess, I don't care.
And I think
Like,
that's
I live my
totally. And I
life.
think that's the point of just meeting people where they are and not having rigid expectations. Which is why I love to turn all the shame that women feel about their homes and really expose it and turn it on its head. And I think I said this the other day that your possessions, and if you have a lot of them, if you're someone who just your nervous system doesn't ascribe to minimalistic culture, that if you have a lot of possessions and let's say they're scattered and all over the place, that's not evidence of your failure. That's evidence of a life well lived because I can't move anybody
Mm-hmm.
towards being in a more healed headspace and body space and home space if I'm using shame to get there. Because life's hard right now. We are in an unprecedented time, not only in our culture, but probably in human history. And we're watching our systems crumble and our culture morph and change practically overnight. So, like, if you have a couple dishes hanging out in the sink for however long, like, you're totally rocking at life. Did you feed yourself today? Did you Are you wearing
Mm-hmm.
clothing? Also, it's fine if you're naked, but like you're doing like a great
Yeah.
freaking job. Most of the time the to-do lists that are running through our head are antiquated. They are not anything we need to be doing, but we're telling ourselves we should. Should doesn't move anybody forward. Should just keeps you stuck, especially if you're a trauma survivor, in a
Hmm.
feast or famine, a sympathetic nervous system state. And as we know, you really want to be in your parasympathetic. That's when you're at rest. And there's just no need for that. Like, let's cut each other some slack.
Yeah. I'm definitely a hobbyist, so I have a lot of stuff that is part of the fact that I like to do hobbies. I'm a very DIYer. My husband has a lot of hobbies, and I'm like, that's why I said I
Mhm.
never could do minimalism because I got too many hobbies and I always want to learn how to do everything. So if anybody has ever knitted or crocheted, like there's definitely a joke within like the yarn community of like how big is your stash? I have a wall. I have like an entire um shelf just full of yarn and more. So I'm like, yeah, I like my yarn because I'm gonna, one of these days I'm gonna use it. All, probably not. But I like to think so. But yeah, like I look around and I'm like hobby, 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 hobby. And that's okay. It's okay that I have hobby stuff. I have a room of hobby stuff. That's, um, okay. So you've talked about how we can look at our home and how it can talk back to us in regards to noticing if we do have some trauma that's manifesting or showing itself through our home. So then, what is it that we can start doing about that? Or, like, what are some simple steps to start um, the journey of healing through
That's
the home?
a great question. I'm actually going to drop two different exercises because we haven't touched on decluttering yet. And that's one of the things I feel so passionate about doing and teaching women how to declutter from a emotional standpoint and not just throwing tips at them or making
Hmm.
them feel more ashamed of what their home looks like. So if anybody's looking to get started at all with better understanding their home and their interactions with space, the first thing to do is notice. I call this cultivating a space IQ. Leave your home, literally leave it, go get your coffee, come back, and walk in the front door or the side door, garage door, however you normally open and enter your home, and go very slowly. What's the first thing you lay your eyes on? What does it smell like? What do you start to notice in every single room? And then move through the home how you would normally move through it. Because the way you're moving through your home is the way energy is moving through your home. And in Feng Shui, everything is about keeping energy
Hmm.
flow alive. So start to notice if boxes have been in the corner there for a while, because what happens is we go a little space blind. You know those old commercials about going nose blind? We go a little
Yeah.
space blind too because we just stop noticing these things in our environment. They become noise in the back of our brain, but they're still there being picked up by our subconscious. So I want you just to move through your home very slowly, start to see things not as how you see them quickly or how you wish to see them, but as they are. And then you'll start to get some very good information of like, oh my God, my laundry has been sitting there for 3 weeks. Or because sometimes you just forget. Um, or like, oh, wow,
Yeah.
I meant to get that fixed and I have not gotten that fixed for a while. Because this stuff is taking up brain real estate. And I find in the home, the one thing that you're most resisting, it's the same thing when when you talk about manifestation with the universe. The one thing that you're most resisting in your home is the one thing that is going to move you so much further along your healing journey and your path in life. Because your home is actually one of your greatest manifesting tools. Um, so that's for anybody who wants
Mm.
to kind of get started. Now, I have one too. If anybody has a lot of trouble decluttering, first, it's not your fault. And if you're someone who has lots of difficulty decluttering, I want you first to go. This is going to be hard, but I'm laying it on y'all because I know you can do it. I want you to go to your junkiest drawer, your messiest closet, the one place that it gives you heart palpitations when you think about it. And I want you to open up the closet or open up the drawer, and I want you to tell the stuff in it that you love it. Because decluttering is really very emotional. And our prior versions, our inner
Mm.
children, our
Yes.
inner younger adults are caught, the energy of them are caught in those possessions. And so when we push them away, we shame them, we kind of yell at ourselves about them. What we're really doing is we're continuing to shame our inner children. And so when if you can just open up the door and just say, baby
Interesting.
girls, I see you. I'm not ready to deal with you yet, but I love you. And if you can get those words out, you'll probably start
Mm.
to cry, and that's okay. Let the tears come and notice what happens in your body. Because for me, in my world, decluttering does not begin with physical decluttering. It begins with coaxing our inner children that are caught up in our possessions out of hiding so that you can tell her that you love her, but that she doesn't get to drive the car anymore. It's your turn. You're the adult. You're going to drive the car and but she's along for the ride and she gets to play in the back seat because you have a proverbial station wagon like 6 miles long. So try that.
Nice. Awesome. That I love that. I'm
Just tell them
totally gonna
that you
try
love
that
it.
because I definitely have some. I've got some decluttering I need to do, and I always have the hardest. Like the only time that I can really come in and start is when I have someone come in to help me, and they have to
Hmm.
kind of like run the show, and then I can start with the decluttering process. But otherwise, I'm like, so
Hmm.
I love that. I'm definitely trying that. um, is there anything else that you feel like we just absolutely need to know in regards to trauma,
Oh,
stress,
that's such a
home,
good
all that?
question. Let me sit with that for a minute. Yeah. Home gets to tell this incredible story in color, in furniture, in energy of who you are and who you're becoming. But for so many of us, home is telling a story of our past. And that's why we feel very mired in it. We feel very stuck. But if you do the work, and when I say do the work, doing the inner work, the outer work, all the really crappy work that we have to do when we move through it, it's not fun. I promise. I know. Been there myself. But if you do it and home starts to reflect who your highest version of yourself, shit, stuff starts to happen that just will blow you away that you could have never dreamed of in your life. Um, and you really just start to see home as your ultimate ally rather than an adversary. And it feng shui then starts to work at like the drop of a hat. You'll like put something somewhere in a special corner,
Hmm.
and it's just like within 48 hours, you'll start to see a difference. And yeah, just home gets to be your friend now rather than, just one more thing you have
That's
to do in your
awesome.
day. Yeah.
So another thing has come to mind that I want to have you, I guess, put your thoughts out on,
Mhm.
and that is decorating. So I guess, like, one thing is, so, like, me personally, I don't decorate. I just don't, never have. And then my sister in law was asking me one day about like, so when I got married, I moved into my husband's home, right? So he already had this house, and I had to come in, and so the things that I have been changing
Mhm.
primarily are colors. because like everything was brown when I got here. And so I've been bringing more color into the home. And when you talk about, I think, so I think sometimes part of our decoration of our home can get to the point of clutter, right? Or because maybe we have too much of something, or some people love to put stuff on the walls. Some people love to decorate with, they have pretty seasonal bedspreads and pillows and stuff like that. Um, and so I'm just kind of curious on your thoughts in regards to, um, I guess part of where I'm coming from on this is like when I bring in the colors, I feel like each room has to have its own color palette. And so when you're thinking about like what you say about colors, right? But also like clutter and like all these different things. When it comes to like making your space, I don't know, yours with decoration, I don't know. I think I'm saying a lot of words and I'm not really sure
I'm
what my exact
following you. I'm
question
picking up what you're
is,
putting
but
down.
hopefully you kind of pick,
So
hopefully,
I have
sweet.
two
I'm going to let you
thoughts.
run with that.
So, back to the clutter conversation. The funny thing about clutter and the definition of mess is that there is no definition. The actual definition of clutter is trash or an untidy heap. So I really support people in no longer using that word because those are your possessions. Sure, maybe you don't like them anymore, they
Hmm.
don't align with you, but at one point you did. At one point you bought that or you took that as a gift and you brought it into your home. So nobody gets to tell you how much stuff is too much stuff. Like you can have collections and baskets full of things or tchotchkes. I'm a New Yorker, so the word tchotchkes comes to mind. But nobody gets to tell you that that's clutter. Collectively, I feel like we have this thought that clutter is like anything in excess, where that's the
Mm.
beauty of life. Like you get to have those things if those things bring you joy. If they don't, there you
It could be
go.
my yarn
That's
stash.
that clearly makes you happy because you brought it up. But if one day you wake up and you're like, "Yeah, I'm over this," that's when it leaves your energy field. But that's such a personal decision. You
Mm.
might never wake up one day and decide that you're over crocheting. So nobody gets to tell you how much stuff is too much stuff. But very much our idea of clutter is influenced by what we see on Instagram, what we see online. Everybody's always saying, "Oh, just get rid of all your stuff." You don't have to. Especially not if it still makes you happy. So that's just my thoughts on the word clutter itself. But then just to dive into decoration a little bit. Oh, I had a thought about it and now I lost it. Come back. You can edit.
Well, I saw a light bulb when I mentioned like each
Thank you.
room has to have
Thank
a
you.
color
Thank you.
palette.
Um, so when it comes to that, I see this occasionally. And for some people it means this, for some people it doesn't. You just have to see if this feels right in your body. I sometimes will see, especially with women, we feel like each room needs to be designed a certain way, or each room maybe has to have a theme. And I find that sometimes that means we're compartmentalizing our life, that the bedroom is the blue and gray room, and the
Mm.
living room is the green and red room. And like you can have color everywhere. Because if we think about back to the roots of feng shui, it's about living in alignment with the energy of the land. If you look at a beautiful garden, like just like a forest or something like that, it's utter chaos. There's colors everywhere. There's no organization to it. It's not
Yeah.
compartmentalized. But yet we don't call a beautiful jungle trash or ugly. We think it's beautiful. We want to go to there and vacation there. So I find that we want to
Yeah.
sometimes there's this impulse when we feel a lack of control on the inside to really project that out onto our spaces because we want to be able to control something. And that's very normal, by the way. There's no
Mm.
shame in that. It's just that if you start to notice it and it bothers you and it feels wrong for you, that's something you can kind of explore in your body if you really feel this need to over compartmentalize your life.
Interesting. Awesome. Thank you. All right. Well, you've given us a wealth of things to think about today, I believe. So as we wrap up, can you please let us know
Yes,
how
come hang
people can
out with
find
me on
you?
TikTok and Instagram. The handles are the same. They're both Sanctuary with Stacy, Stacy. And especially if you're interested in more in what I've said about decluttering, I have a new workshop. It's self-paced, so you get to go through this, but I'm going to take you through all of that deeper inner child healing work by really breaking out of overwhelm, feeling free of shame, and starting to reconnect to your inner children. I've got a whole series of workshops coming out this spring and summer, but the first one is actually dropping here in April. So you can hop on and see how they
Yay.
go for you. It's a completely brand new way of decluttering, and my clients have really freaking amazing breakthroughs after doing this work. So
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being my first interview for my podcast. Yay. And I will also be getting this up on YouTube, which I will have in the show notes as well. Um, so thank you so much, Stacy, for sharing with us how our home can be a reflection of our inner stress and trauma and how we can use the home to heal. So,
thank you for having
yeah,
me.
thank you.